Emily Harrison gazed out of the limousine window, the sprawling Texas landscape flashing by like scenes from a different life. This was the farthest she had ever been from her world of penthouses and gala events, and she couldn't help but feel a thrill of apprehension mixed with excitement. For the first time, she was stepping out of her gilded cage, stepping into a life she barely understood. But this was the only way to know Jackson's family, the only way to know if she truly belonged by his side. The limousine slowed as they approached a small, rustic inn on the outskirts of Jackson's family ranch. It looked quaint, a picture of rural simplicity with its whitewashed walls and flower beds overflowing with wild blooms. Emily took a deep breath, rehearsing the story she had crafted. For the next few weeks, she would not be Emily Harrison, the heiress. She would be Emily Moore, a new, hardworking maid. She opened the car door before the driver could assist her, feeling a sense of freedom in this small, rebellious act. She adjusted the collar of her plain white blouse and smoothed down the skirt of her simple uniform, her fingers trembling slightly. This was it. There would be no luxury, no special treatment, just a chance to observe Jackson's world from within. "Good evening, ma'am," said a kindly woman behind the reception desk as Emily stepped inside. The inn's lobby was warm and inviting, with wooden beams and the scent of fresh coffee lingering in the air. "I'm here to apply for the maid position," Emily said, her voice steady despite the nerves knotting in her stomach. The woman's smile widened. "You're in luck. We've been looking for some extra help. Do you have any experience?" "I've worked at a few places," Emily replied, her heart racing as she tried to make her lie sound convincing. "Perfect," the woman said, handing her a key. "Room 3B. Settle in tonight and be ready to start tomorrow morning." Emily nodded, clutching the key as if it were a lifeline. She headed up the narrow staircase, her heart pounding. This was real. She was really doing this. The room was small but cozy, with a single bed, a nightstand, and a worn armchair by the window. She placed her single suitcase on the bed and sat down, exhaling deeply. Her phone buzzed, and she glanced at the screen to see a message from Jackson. "Can't wait to introduce you to my family this weekend. They're going to love you." Emily's chest tightened. If only he knew. She was going to meet his family, but not as his fiancée. Not yet. The first night passed in a blur of restless thoughts. The next morning, Emily dressed in her uniform, feeling both excited and terrified. She spent the day learning her new role, cleaning rooms, changing sheets, and scrubbing floors. The work was physically exhausting, but strangely satisfying. Here, she was just Emily, no expectations, no judgments. On her third day, she finally saw him. Jackson was riding up to the inn on his horse, his silhouette framed by the afternoon sun. He looked every bit the rugged cowboy, his shirt sleeves rolled up, revealing strong, tanned arms. Her heart skipped a beat as she ducked behind a potted plant, peeking out to watch him greet the inn's owner with a handshake and a warm smile. "He's a good man," a voice said beside her. Emily jumped, turning to see an older woman with a kindly face and eyes that sparkled with mischief. "Our Jackson. He's the pride of this town." Emily forced a smile, her heart still racing. "I can see that. He's had to work so hard to keep the ranch running, especially since his father passed." The woman continued, her voice softening with sympathy. "But he's done us all proud." Emily's eyes followed Jackson as he dismounted, talking animatedly with the inn's owner. This was a side of him she had never seen. A man deeply connected to his roots, respected and loved by his community. It was a stark contrast to the polished businessman she had met in the city. Her resolve hardened. This was why she was here, to understand his world, his family, and their values. Only then could she decide if she truly belonged in it. That evening, she caught another glimpse of Jackson as he left the inn, tipping his hat to her without realizing who she was. Her heart fluttered at the near miss, and she laughed softly at the absurdity of it all. She was so close to him, yet hidden in plain sight. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Emily stood by the window of her small room, looking out at the distant silhouette of the Sullivan Ranch. This was just the beginning. There was so much more to discover, so many secrets yet to be unearthed. She could feel the thrill of the unknown pulling her forward. and deep down, she knew that whatever happened, this journey would change everything for her, for Jackson, and for everyone caught in the tangled web of the past. Emily woke up before dawn, the first light of the morning creeping through the thin curtains of her modest room. The air was cool and still, the only sound the faint rustle of leaves outside her window. She stretched, feeling a dull ache in her muscles from the unfamiliar work of the previous day. It was a welcome pain, a reminder that she was finally doing something real, something beyond the confines of her carefully curated life. She dressed quickly, tying her hair back in a neat ponytail and slipping into the plain maid's uniform that had become her disguise. Her heart raced with a mix of nerves and anticipation. Today, she would get a closer look at Jackson's world, and if she was lucky, she'd learn something about his family without anyone realizing who she really was. The inn was quiet as she made her way downstairs to the small kitchen where breakfast was being prepared. Mrs. Grant, the owner, looked up from the stove and gave her a warm smile. "Good morning, Emily. Ready for another busy day?" Emily nodded, returning the smile. "Yes, ma'am. What do you need me to do first?" "There's a lot to get done before the guests wake up," Mrs. Grant said, handing her a list. "But I'd like you to start with the dining room. Make sure everything is set for breakfast, and then you can move on to the rooms." Emily took the list, feeling a small surge of determination. This was what she needed. Something to focus on, something to keep her mind off the swirling confusion of emotions that had kept her awake most of the night. She stepped into the dining room, setting out silverware and arranging the tables with care. As she worked, her thoughts drifted to Jackson. She remembered the look of quiet pride in his eyes when he talked about the ranch, the way he laughed easily with the people in the town, his kindness and generosity that seemed to touch everyone he met. This was a side of him she had never seen before, a side she was falling in love with all over again. A noise at the entrance made her look up. Jackson stood there, his hat in his hand, a curious smile playing on his lips. "Good morning," he said, his eyes sweeping over the room before settling on her. "You must be new here. I don't think we've met." Emily's heart jumped. This was it, the moment she had been both dreading and longing for. She kept her head down, focusing on straightening a napkin that didn't need straightening. "Yes, sir. I just started a few days ago." "I'm Jackson," he said, his voice warm and friendly. "My family owns the ranch nearby. What's your name?" "Emily," she said softly, hoping her voice didn't betray the turmoil inside her. "Emily Moore. Nice to meet you, Emily Moore." Jackson's smile widened, and for a moment, she saw a flicker of something in his eyes, as if he was trying to place her. But then it was gone, and he was just the friendly rancher again, making small talk with the new maid. "Nice to meet you too, sir." She forced herself to look up, meeting his gaze for the briefest moment before looking away. Up close, he was even more handsome than she remembered, his eyes a striking shade of blue that seemed to see right through her. "Well, I won't keep you from your work," he said, his smile lingering as he turned to go. "Have a good day, Emily." She watched him leave, her heart pounding in her chest. That had been too close. She couldn't afford to slip up like that again, not if she wanted to keep her cover. But the brief encounter had left her both shaken and exhilarated. It had been so long since she'd seen him, and there was a strange thrill in knowing that she was so close, yet so hidden. The day passed in a blur of activity. She cleaned rooms, changed sheets, and scrubbed floors, all the while keeping an ear out for any mention of the Sullivan family. She heard snippets of conversation from the other staff and the occasional guest. How Jackson's mother, Mary, was a strong, proud woman who had held the family together after her husband's death. How the ranch had struggled but managed to stay afloat because of Jackson's hard work and determination. It was clear that the Sullivans were beloved in this town, respected and admired by everyone who knew them. In the evening, as she was cleaning the reception area, Mrs. Grant approached her with a gentle smile. "You're doing a great job, Emily. I'm glad we found you when we did." "Thank you, Mrs. Grant," Emily said, genuinely touched by the older woman's kindness. "I'm happy to be here." "There's something I wanted to ask you," Mrs. Grant continued, her tone turning a bit hesitant. "The Sullivans are having a family dinner at the ranch tomorrow night, and they could use some extra help. I thought you might be interested." Emily's heart skipped a beat. A family dinner? At the ranch? This was exactly the opportunity she had been hoping for. A chance to see Jackson's family in their own environment, to understand them better. But it was also risky. What if someone recognized her? What if Jackson realized who she really was? Still, she couldn't pass this up. "I'd love to help," she said, keeping her voice steady. "Wonderful," Mrs. Grant said, looking pleased. "I'll let Mary know. Be there around 6, and wear something nice, no uniform. It's a special occasion." Emily nodded, her mind already racing. This was it, the moment she had been preparing for since she arrived. She would have to be careful, but if she played her cards right, she might just get the answer she was looking for. That night, as she lay in bed, staring up at the dark ceiling, Emily felt a mix of anticipation and fear. Tomorrow, she would step into the Sullivan home, into their lives, and see for herself the world that had shaped Jackson. She would be a part of it, even if only for a few hours. And maybe, just maybe, she would find a way to bridge the gap between who she was and who she was pretending to be. Because deep down, she knew that if she wanted to be with Jackson, she had to find a way to belong in his world, secrets and all. Emily arrived at the Sullivan Ranch early in the evening, her heart pounding as she made her way up the gravel path. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm golden glow over the sprawling fields and the large, weathered house that stood proudly at the end of the drive. She paused for a moment, taking it all in. The way the light hit the whitewashed walls, the way the air smelled of fresh hay and earth. This was Jackson's world, so different from the pristine elegance of the life she had always known. She smoothed the simple blue dress she had chosen for the evening, her fingers trembling slightly. She had taken Mrs. Grant's advice and left her maid uniform behind, hoping to blend in as just another guest. But it was hard to shake the feeling that she was an outsider, intruding on something private and sacred. The front door was open, and she could hear the murmur of voices and laughter drifting out into the warm evening air. Taking a deep breath, she stepped inside, her gaze sweeping over the scene before her. The living room was filled with people, family, friends, and neighbors, gathered around a large wooden table laden with food. The atmosphere was lively, full of warmth and affection that was palpable even to a stranger like her. "Emily, you made it." Mrs. Grant's voice broke through her thoughts, and she turned to see the older woman waving her over. "Come on in, dear. I'll introduce you to Mary. Mary Sullivan, Jackson's mother, the woman who had raised him, shaped him, made him the man he was today." Emily's heart clenched with a mixture of excitement and nerves as she followed Mrs. Grant across the room. Mary was standing by the table, her back to them, arranging a platter of roasted vegetables. She turned as they approached, a welcoming smile lighting up her face. She was a striking woman, her hair streaked with silver, her eyes clear and direct. There was a strength in her gaze that immediately commanded respect. "Mary, this is Emily Moore," Mrs. Grant said, her voice filled with pride. "She's been helping out at the inn, and I thought she might lend a hand tonight." Mary's smile widened as she extended her hand. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Emily. We're always happy to have an extra pair of hands around here." Emily shook her hand, the warmth of Mary's grip grounding her. "Thank you, Mrs. Sullivan. I'm happy to help in any way I can. Please call me Mary," she said with a soft laugh. "Everyone does." She gestured to the kitchen. "Why don't you come with me, and I'll show you what we need to get done." Emily followed her, grateful for the chance to escape the crowded room and the curious gazes that had begun to linger on her. The kitchen was bustling, a whirlwind of activity as people moved in and out, carrying trays of food and pitchers of sweet tea. "I hope Mrs. Grant hasn't been working you too hard," Mary said as she handed Emily a bowl of salad to toss. "It can be a bit overwhelming for someone new." "Not at all," Emily said, carefully mixing the greens. "Everyone's been so kind. It's a nice change of pace from what I'm used to." Mary glanced at her, a hint of curiosity in her eyes. "And what are you used to, if you don't mind me asking?" Emily hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Just a different kind of life. I guess I wanted to try something new, see a different side of things." Mary nodded, seeming to accept this vague explanation. "Well, you've certainly come to the right place. Life here is simple, but it's full of heart. Jackson always says that's what makes it worth living. The mention of Jackson's name sent a jolt through Emily, but she kept her expression neutral. He seems like a wonderful person, she said quietly. He is, Mary agreed, her voice softening. He's been through a lot, but he never gives up. This ranch is his life, and he works so hard to keep it going, for all of us. There was a note of pride in her voice, but also something else, something deeper, tinged with sadness. Emily wanted to ask more, to dig into the history that lay beneath Mary's words, but she knew she had to be careful. She was walking a fine line, balancing her curiosity with the need to keep her true identity hidden. Just then, the back door swung open and Jackson strode in, his presence filling the room like sunlight breaking through clouds. He was dressed casually, his sleeves rolled up, his hair tousled from the wind. He stopped when he saw them, his eyes widening in surprise. "Emily," he said, his voice a mix of confusion and amusement. "What are you doing here?" Emily's heart skipped a beat. For a moment, she panicked, thinking he had recognized her. But then she realized he was just surprised to see her outside of the inn. "Mrs. Grant asked me to help out," she said quickly, trying to sound casual. "I hope that's okay." Jackson's smile returned, warm and genuine. "Of course. We're happy to have you." He glanced at his mother, his expression softening. "Mom, I told you we didn't need all this fuss. It's just a family dinner." "Family and friends," Mary corrected, her eyes twinkling as she looked between her son and Emily. "And you know how much we love to spoil you when you're home." Jackson rolled his eyes, but there was a tenderness in the gesture that made Emily's heart ache. He was so at ease here, so deeply connected to these people, this place. It was a side of him she had never seen in the city, where he had always seemed a little out of place, a little restless. Here, he was completely himself. The evening passed in a blur of laughter and stories, the room filled with the warmth of shared history and love. Emily moved quietly among the guests, refilling glasses and clearing plates, watching Jackson from the corner of her eye. He was the center of attention, his deep, rumbling laugh echoing through the room as he teased his cousins and told stories about life on the ranch. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine what it would be like to be a part of this world, to be truly accepted as Jackson's fiancée, not just a stranger passing through. But the weight of her secret pressed down on her, a constant reminder that she didn't really belong here. As the night drew to a close and the guests began to drift away, Emily found herself outside, standing on the wide porch that overlooked the dark fields. The stars were brilliant overhead, the air cool and fresh. She wrapped her arms around herself, feeling a strange mix of peace and longing. Beautiful, isn't it? She turned to see Jackson standing beside her, his hands in his pockets, his gaze fixed on the sky. "I've seen a lot of places, but nothing quite compares to this." "It's breathtaking," she agreed softly, her voice barely more than a whisper. They stood in silence for a moment, the only sound the distant chirp of crickets and the rustle of the wind in the trees. Emily's heart ached with unspoken words, things she longed to tell him but couldn't. "You know," Jackson said, his voice low and thoughtful, "I'm glad you're here, Emily. There's something about you. I don't know, it just feels right." Emily's breath caught in her throat. She turned to look at him, her eyes searching his face. For a moment, she saw something there. Something raw and real, a glimmer of the connection she had felt from the very beginning. "I'm glad too," she said finally, her voice trembling. "More than you know." They stood there for a long time, side by side under the endless sky, neither of them speaking. In that quiet, shared moment, Emily felt a strange sense of peace settle over her. Whatever happened, whatever secrets were still to be uncovered, she knew one thing for certain. She was exactly where she was meant to be. The next morning, Emily woke to the soft light of dawn filtering through her window. She felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief that she had survived the dinner without raising suspicion and a growing sense of purpose. The Sullivans were becoming more than just strangers she needed to understand. They were becoming people she cared about, especially Mary. There was something about Jackson's mother that pulled at her, a strength and grace that hinted at stories untold. After finishing her morning duties at the inn, Emily found herself lingering, unable to shake the feeling that there was something more she needed to do. She knew Mrs. Grant would be fine without her for a few hours, and the thought of spending more time with Mary, learning from her, was irresistible. Maybe it was reckless to get this close, but Emily felt drawn to her, compelled by a need to understand the woman who had shaped Jackson's life so profoundly. She arrived at the Sullivan Ranch in the early afternoon. The sun hung high in the sky, bathing the fields in a warm, golden light. The ranch was quieter now, the bustle of the previous evening replaced by the steady hum of daily chores. Emily took a deep breath and knocked on the front door, feeling the familiar flutter of nerves in her chest. Mary answered, a surprised smile spreading across her face. Emily, this is a nice surprise. What brings you here? Emily hesitated, searching for the right words. I just wanted to see if you needed any help around the house. I have some free time, and I really enjoyed being here last night. Mary's eyes softened, and she stepped back, opening the door wider. Well, I won't say no to a little company. Come on in. The house felt different in the daylight, quieter, almost serene. Mary led Emily into the kitchen, where a basket of fresh vegetables sat on the counter. I was just about to start preparing lunch. How do you feel about making a salad? I'd love to, Emily said, her nerves easing as she picked up a knife and began chopping. They worked side by side in comfortable silence for a while, the rhythmic slice of the knife against the cutting board filling the air. Emily felt herself relaxing, the simple, repetitive task calming her racing thoughts. She glanced at Mary, noticing the way her face softened as she focused on her work, the hint of a smile playing at her lips. Last night was wonderful, Emily said, breaking the silence. You have a beautiful family. Mary looked up, her eyes warm. Thank you. I'm very proud of them. Jackson especially. He's been through so much, but he never lets it hold him back. Emily nodded, her heart aching with a mix of admiration and sadness. He seems like an incredible person. He is, Mary said softly, her gaze distant. He was just a boy when his father died. It was so sudden, so unexpected. One day he was playing in the fields, and the next, he had to become the man of the house. Emily's chest tightened at the thought of Jackson as a young boy, his world shattered by loss. She wanted to reach out, to comfort Mary, but she held back, unsure of her place in this conversation. He's always felt responsible for all of us, Mary continued, her voice thick with emotion. Even when he was just a child, he worked so hard, always trying to prove that he could take care of the ranch, of me, of everyone. I don't think he's ever really let himself rest. Emily swallowed hard, the weight of Mary's words sinking in. She thought of Jackson, always so strong, so steady, carrying the burden of his family's legacy on his shoulders. She wanted to say something, to offer some kind of solace, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she reached over and squeezed Mary's hand gently. You raised a wonderful son, she said softly. He's kind and generous and he loves you so much. Mary looked at her, surprise flickering in her eyes before her expression softened. Thank you, Emily. That means a lot to me. They finished preparing lunch together, the silence between them no longer heavy but filled with unspoken understanding. As they sat down to eat, Mary asked Emily about her life, her family, her reasons for coming to the small town. Emily answered carefully, weaving a story that was close enough to the truth to be believable but distant enough to protect her secret. I've been thinking about making some changes in my life, Emily said, pushing a piece of lettuce around her plate. I guess I just wanted to see what else is out there, beyond what I've always known. Mary nodded thoughtfully, her eyes searching Emily's face. It's brave what you're doing. A lot of people never take that step, never leave what's comfortable. It's not easy to start over. No, it's not, Emily agreed, her voice barely a whisper. But sometimes, you have to. For yourself, and for the people you care about. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning that Emily wasn't sure Mary would understand. But Mary just nodded again, her gaze steady and kind. I hope you find what you're looking for, Emily, she said gently. And if you ever need someone to talk to, you know where to find me. Emily's throat tightened with gratitude, and she blinked back sudden tears. Thank you, Mary. That means more to me than you know. They spent the rest of the afternoon together, chatting easily as they worked around the house. Emily found herself opening up more than she had intended, sharing stories and thoughts she hadn't voiced in a long time. There was something about Mary's presence, so calm and reassuring, that made it easy to let down her guard. As the sun dipped low in the sky, casting long shadows across the fields, Emily knew it was time to leave. She stood on the front porch, looking out at the wide, open land, feeling a strange sense of peace. This place, this family, was becoming more important to her than she had ever imagined. "Take care, Emily," Mary said, her voice warm and sincere. "And don't be a stranger, okay?" Emily smiled, her heart full. "I won't. Thank you for today, Mary. I really enjoyed it." Mary waved as Emily walked back down the path, her heart light despite the heavy weight of the secret she carried. She glanced back once, seeing Mary standing in the doorway, framed by the warm light of the house behind her. Emily's chest tightened with a surge of affection and longing. This wasn't just about Jackson anymore. It was about all of them: Mary, the ranch, the life they had built together. And for the first time, Emily realized just how high the stakes really were. She was playing a dangerous game, one that could shatter everything if the truth came out. But as she walked back to the inn, the evening breeze cool against her skin, she knew she couldn't turn back now. She was in too deep, her heart too entangled. All she could do was move forward, one step at a time, and hope that when the moment came, she would find the courage to do what was right, no matter what the cost. Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something was shifting. Her afternoons at the Sullivan Ranch had become a ritual, a quiet routine that was both comforting and terrifying. Each day, she grew closer to Mary, learning about the family's history, their struggles, their joys. Each day, she found herself caring more and more, the walls she had carefully built around her heart crumbling with every shared smile, every gentle word. It was during one of these afternoons that Emily first noticed something odd. She had been helping Mary in the garden, their hands deep in the rich soil as they planted new flowers along the walkway. The air was warm, filled with the scent of lavender and rosemary, and the steady rhythm of their work lulled Emily into a sense of calm. "Mary," she said, her voice breaking the quiet, "I've been meaning to ask you about that old barn up on the hill. It looks like it hasn't been used in years." Mary glanced up, her expression guarded for a brief moment before she smiled. "Oh, that old thing. It belonged to my husband. He used to keep his tools and equipment there. After he passed, we didn't have much use for it." There was something in her tone, a note of finality that made Emily hesitate. But curiosity tugged at her, and she found herself pushing just a little further. "I noticed a few boxes in there the other day when I was walking by. Do they belong to Jackson?" Mary's hands stilled, her gaze turning distant. "Some of them, yes, and some belong to his father. I've been meaning to sort through them, but—" Her voice trailed off, and Emily's heart clenched. There was a sadness in Mary's eyes, a weight that seemed to press down on her shoulders. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to pry," Emily said quickly. "I just thought it might be nice to clear it out, maybe turn it into something useful again." Mary nodded slowly, her smile returning, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "That's a kind offer, Emily. I think Jackson would appreciate it, but there are things in there that are best left alone." Emily forced herself to nod, her heart pounding. She could sense the tension in Mary's words, the unspoken truth lurking just beneath the surface. There was more to the story, she was sure of it, but she couldn't push, not without risking everything. They worked in silence for a while longer, the atmosphere between them no longer as easy as it had been before. Emily's mind raced with possibilities, questions that she had no answers to. What was Mary hiding? And why did it feel like whatever it was had something to do with her? Later, as the sun dipped low in the sky, casting long shadows across the fields, Emily found herself wandering up to the barn. She had been avoiding it since that first day, telling herself that it was none of her business, that she had no right to go snooping around. But the conversation with Mary had stirred something in her, a restless need to know the truth. The door creaked as she pushed it open, the inside of the barn cool and dim after the bright afternoon sun. Dust motes floated in the beams of light that streamed through the cracks in the wooden walls, and the air smelled faintly of hay and old wood. Boxes were stacked haphazardly against the far wall, some of them so old that the cardboard had begun to crumble. Emily hesitated, her heart racing. This was wrong. She knew it was wrong. But something drew her forward, a compulsion she couldn't quite explain. Her footsteps echoed softly in the empty space as she approached the boxes, her hands trembling as she reached out to lift the lid of the nearest one. The first few were filled with the mundane remnants of ranch life, tools, old equipment, a few yellowed papers that seemed to be repair invoices. But then, she found a smaller box, tucked away in the corner, its lid covered in a thin layer of dust. It was locked, the metal latch rusted and bent, and Emily's pulse quickened as she traced her fingers over it. Why would Mary keep this locked away? What could be so important? She hesitated, glancing over her shoulder as if expecting Mary, or worse, Jackson, to appear in the doorway, anger in their eyes. But the barn was empty, the ranch quiet, and the need to know gnawed at her, relentless and fierce. Taking a deep breath, she grabbed a rusty crowbar from the wall and wedged it under the lid. It took a few tries, but the old lock finally gave way with a sharp crack, and the lid popped open. Inside, neatly arranged in faded envelopes, were letters. Dozens of them, their paper brittle and yellowed with age. Emily's heart pounded as she picked one up, her fingers trembling. The handwriting was elegant, looping across the page in a style that was both familiar and strange. "My dearest Mary," it began, and Emily's breath caught in her throat. She read on, her eyes widening as the words sank in. "I miss you more than words can say. Every day, I think of you, of the life we could have had. I'm sorry for what happened, for everything I couldn't be. But know that I will always love you. Always." The letter was signed with a single initial, R. Emily's mind raced, the pieces of the puzzle clicking together with a sickening clarity. This wasn't just a random love letter. This was a part of Mary's past, a past she had clearly tried to bury. But why? Who was this man? And why did it feel like these letters were somehow connected to her own life? She reached for another letter, and then another, each one revealing more of the same story. A love that had been intense, passionate, and ultimately heartbreaking. The more she read, the more Emily felt a growing sense of dread. There were hints, barely veiled references that seemed to point to something bigger, something more devastating than just a lost romance. And then she found it. A letter dated just a few months before Jackson was born. "I wish I could be there, Mary. I wish I could help you, hold you, tell you that everything will be okay. But I can't. You know that. I've made my choice, and now I have to live with it. I just hope you can forgive me, and that one day, our son will understand why I couldn't be there." Emily's heart stopped. She stared at the words, her mind numb. Our son. The letter fell from her trembling fingers, fluttering to the floor like a wounded bird. This couldn't be true. It couldn't be. But deep down, she knew it was. Jackson wasn't just the man she loved. He was her brother, her father's secret son. The truth hit her like a punch to the gut, leaving her breathless, reeling. The world seemed to tilt around her, the barn spinning in a blur of shadows and light. How could this be happening? How could the man she had fallen in love with be the same person she had been searching for her whole life? And what was she supposed to do now, with the weight of this terrible truth crushing her? She stumbled back, her mind racing, tears blurring her vision. She had to get out, had to think. But as she turned, she froze, her heart leaping into her throat. Jackson was standing in the doorway, his eyes wide, confusion and shock etched across his face. "Emily?" he said, his voice low, uncertain. "What are you doing here?" Emily opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She stood there, frozen, the truth hanging between them like a blade, sharp and deadly. And in that moment, she knew that nothing would ever be the same again. "Emily, what's going on?" Jackson's voice was strained, the confusion in his eyes darkening to something closer to fear. He took a hesitant step forward, his gaze darting to the open box, the scattered letters. "What is all this?" Emily's heart pounded so loudly she was sure he could hear it. Panic clawed at her throat as she tried to find her voice, tried to force the words out, but nothing came. How could she possibly explain this? How could she tell him that everything he thought he knew about his life, his family, was a lie? Jackson, her voice cracked, and she swallowed hard, forcing herself to meet his gaze. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean for you to find out like this. I didn't mean to. Find out what? He interrupted, his eyes narrowing as he took another step closer. What are you talking about? Emily's knees felt weak, the weight of the truth pressing down on her like a physical force. She glanced at the letter on the floor, the words "our son" glaring up at her like an accusation. There was no way out. She had to tell him. She owed him that much. Jackson, she said, her voice trembling, these letters, they're from my father. Jackson's frown deepened, confusion etched across his face. Your father? What do you mean? Emily took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. My father and your mother, they were in love a long time ago, before he left her and became the man everyone knows today. I didn't know any of this until I found these letters. But Jackson, what they're saying is that you're my brother. The words hung in the air, heavy and awful, and for a moment, everything seemed to freeze. Jackson's face went pale, his eyes widening as he stared at her, as if he were trying to make sense of something impossible. What? He whispered, the word barely more than a breath. That can't be. You're saying your father is? Richard Harrison, Emily finished, her voice breaking. I didn't know, Jackson. I swear I didn't know. I came here because I wanted to understand more about you, about your family. I didn't know we were. Stop, he said sharply, holding up a hand as if to ward off her words. Just stop. This is insane, Emily. It doesn't make any sense. My mother would have told me. She would have said something. She couldn't, Emily said desperately. Think about it, Jackson. How could she tell you something like this? Your father was gone, and she had to raise you on her own. What was she supposed to say? That the man who left her behind was some rich hotel tycoon? Jackson's jaw clenched, his eyes blazing with anger and hurt. So you've just been lying to me this whole time? Pretending to be someone else? Pretending to be… what? Some kind of investigator? No. Emily's voice cracked, and she took a step forward, reaching out as if she could somehow bridge the chasm that had opened between them. I never meant to lie to you, Jackson. I just wanted to understand. I didn't want to hurt you, I swear. Jackson shook his head, his face a mask of disbelief. But you did. You lied to everyone. To me, to my mother. Do you have any idea what this will do to her? Emily's heart twisted painfully at the thought of Mary, the warmth and kindness she had shown her, the trust she had betrayed. I know it's going to hurt her, and I'm so sorry. But we have to tell her the truth. She deserves to know. Jackson laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that made Emily flinch. The truth? What truth? That her son has been lied to his entire life? That everything she thought she knew was a lie? Tears blurred Emily's vision, but she forced herself to stand her ground. I know this is hard, Jackson. I know it's horrible, but we can't hide from it. We have to face it together. Together? Jackson's voice was cold, his eyes filled with a pain that made Emily's chest ache. There is no together, Emily. Whatever we had, it's over. You've destroyed it. You've destroyed everything. The words cut through her like a knife, and for a moment, she couldn't breathe. She had known this was a possibility, had known that the truth could tear them apart, but hearing him say it, seeing the coldness in his eyes, it was almost more than she could bear. Please, Jackson, she whispered, her voice breaking. Don't shut me out. We can figure this out. We can. No, he said, his voice flat and final. You need to leave. Now, before I say something I'll really regret. Emily's heart shattered at the finality in his tone, but she nodded, knowing she had no right to ask for anything more. She turned, her vision swimming with tears, and stumbled out of the barn, her legs trembling beneath her. The evening air was cool and crisp against her flushed cheeks as she made her way back down the hill, her mind numb, her heart a hollow, aching void. She had known this would be hard, had known that the truth would change everything, but she hadn't been prepared for the reality of it, for the raw, searing pain of losing Jackson. She reached the inn and slipped inside, her movements mechanical as she climbed the stairs to her room. Everything felt surreal, as if she were trapped in a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. She sank down on the edge of the bed, her hands trembling as she buried her face in them. What had she done? She had come here to find answers, to understand her past, but all she had done was tear apart the lives of people she had come to care about more than she had ever imagined possible. She had destroyed everything, and now she was alone, utterly and completely alone, with no idea what to do next. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand, and she glanced at it through tear-blurred eyes. A message from Jackson, the words stark and final. Stay away. Don't come back to the ranch. Don't contact us again. Emily's breath hitched, a sob tearing from her throat. She wanted to reply, to beg him to give her a chance to explain, but what was the point? He didn't want to hear it. He didn't want anything to do with her. She dropped the phone and curled up on the bed, her body shaking with sobs. She had lost him. She had lost everything. Hours passed in a blur of pain and grief, the world outside her window darkening as the sun sank below the horizon. She lay there, numb and hollow, until the tears finally ran dry, leaving her drained and exhausted. But as she stared up at the ceiling, her mind racing, a new resolve began to take hold. She couldn't just leave things like this. She couldn't walk away, no matter what Jackson had said. She owed it to him, to Mary, to herself, to find a way to make this right. She didn't know how, didn't know what it would take, but she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't giving up. Not now. Not ever. Because despite everything, she still loved him. And she wasn't going to let the truth destroy them. Not without a fight. The next morning, Emily woke with a start, her body aching from a night of restless sleep. The events of the previous day crashed over her like a wave, leaving her breathless and trembling. She lay there for a moment, staring up at the ceiling, willing herself to find the strength to face what lay ahead. She couldn't let it end like this, not with Jackson's final, devastating words echoing in her mind. Stay away. Don't come back to the ranch. Don't contact us again. But she knew she had to go back. She had to see Mary. If she left now, if she ran away, the truth would remain buried beneath layers of pain and lies, and the Sullivan family would never have the chance to heal. And that was something she couldn't live with. She forced herself to get up, her hands trembling as she dressed in the same simple clothes she had worn the day before. Her reflection in the mirror was pale and drawn, her eyes red and swollen from crying, but there was a determination in her gaze that hadn't been there before. I can do this, she told herself, taking a deep breath. I have to do this. By the time she arrived at the ranch, the morning sun was high in the sky, casting long shadows across the fields. The air was thick with tension as she walked up the familiar path to the front door, her heart pounding in her chest. She paused for a moment, gathering her courage, and then knocked. The door opened almost immediately, and Mary stood there, her expression a mixture of confusion and concern. Emily? What are you doing here? Emily's throat tightened at the sight of her, at the warmth in her eyes that she knew she didn't deserve. Mary, I need to talk to you, she said, her voice shaking. I found something in the barn yesterday. Something you need to know about. Mary's face paled, her eyes flicking past Emily to the barn in the distance. What do you mean? What did you find? Letters, Emily said, the word catching in her throat. From my father. They were hidden in an old box and I didn't know what they were until I read them. Mary's eyes widened, her hand flying to her mouth. Oh, God, she whispered, her voice trembling. You know. Emily nodded, tears blurring her vision. Yes, I know everything. And I'm so sorry, Mary. I'm so sorry for what happened to you, for what my father did. I can't change the past, but I can be here now. I want to help, if you'll let me. For a long moment, Mary just stared at her, her face a mask of shock and grief. And then, to Emily's surprise, she stepped back, opening the door wider. Come in, she said quietly. We need to talk. Emily followed her into the living room, her heart in her throat. The room was filled with the warm, familiar scent of coffee and old wood, but the atmosphere was heavy with unspoken words, with the weight of the truth that had finally come to light. They sat down on the worn couch, the silence between them stretching taut and fragile. Mary's hands were trembling as she reached for a tissue, dabbing at the tears that had begun to spill down her cheeks. "I always knew this day would come," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "But I never imagined it would be like this. I never thought it would be you, Emily." Emily's heart clenched painfully. "I didn't know either, Mary. I swear. I didn't know who Jackson really was when I came here. I just wanted to understand where I came from, to learn more about my father. I never meant to hurt you." "I believe you," Mary said, her voice barely more than a whisper. "But it still hurts. It hurts to think about him, about everything we lost." Emily reached out, her hand covering Mary's. "Tell me about him. Tell me what happened. Please, I need to know." Mary took a deep breath, her gaze distant as she began to speak. "We were so young when we met. Your father wasn't the man you know today. He was kind and passionate, so full of dreams. We fell in love so quickly, so intensely. But then, he changed. His ambitions took over, and he became someone I didn't recognize anymore." She paused, her voice breaking. "When I found out I was pregnant, he was already gone, already on his way to becoming the man the world knows today. He never knew about Jackson. I never told him. How could I? He had already made his choice, and I had to make mine." Tears streamed down Emily's cheeks as she listened, her heart aching with the pain and regret in Mary's voice. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I'm so sorry for everything you went through. You didn't deserve that." Mary shook her head, a sad smile tugging at her lips. "I don't regret having Jackson. He's the best thing that ever happened to me. But keeping this secret, hiding the truth from him, it's been eating away at me for years. And now, it's all come crashing down." Emily squeezed her hand gently. "We can fix this, Mary. We can tell Jackson the truth, together. He deserves to know." Mary's face crumpled, and she buried her face in her hands, sobs racking her body. "I'm so scared, Emily. I'm scared of what this will do to him, to us. He's already been through so much. How can I ask him to face this too?" "We don't have a choice," Emily said softly, her own voice shaking. "The truth is out now. We have to deal with it, no matter how painful it is." Mary nodded, her shoulders slumping in defeat. "You're right. I know you're right. But I don't know how to do this." "Together," Emily said, the word resonating with a strength she hadn't known she possessed. "We'll do it together." Just then, the sound of the front door opening made them both look up, their hearts leaping in unison. Jackson stepped into the room, his face hard, his eyes flashing with anger and betrayal. "What the hell is going on?" he demanded, his voice harsh and cold. "Why is she here, Mom? I told her to leave." "Jackson, please," Mary said, standing up, her hands outstretched in a gesture of desperation. "We need to talk. There's something you need to know." "I don't want to hear it," Jackson snapped, his gaze fixed on Emily, his eyes filled with a pain that made her heart ache. "I don't want to hear anything she has to say." "Jackson, stop." Mary's voice broke, and she took a step forward, her hands trembling. "You need to listen to her. You need to listen to me. This isn't just about her. It's about us. It's about your father." Jackson froze, his expression shifting from anger to confusion. "My father? What are you talking about?" Mary took a deep breath, her voice steadying as she looked into her son's eyes. "Jackson, Richard Harrison is your father. He's Emily's father too." For a moment, the room was completely still, the words hanging in the air like a storm cloud, heavy and dark. Jackson stared at Mary, his face pale, his eyes wide with shock and disbelief. "No," he whispered, shaking his head as if trying to ward off a nightmare. "That's not true. That can't be true." "It is," Mary said softly, her voice trembling. "I'm so sorry, Jackson. I wanted to tell you so many times, but I was scared. I didn't want you to hate me." Jackson stumbled back, his hand gripping the back of a chair as if to steady himself. "You lied to me," he said, his voice breaking. "My whole life, you've lied to me." "I was trying to protect you," Mary cried, tears streaming down her face. I didn't want you to grow up with that kind of burden, that kind of pain. I thought I was doing the right thing." Jackson's gaze shifted to Emily, his eyes blazing with anger and hurt. "And you? What? Did you come here just to ruin our lives? To dig up secrets that should have stayed buried?" "No," Emily cried, her own tears falling freely now. "I came here to find answers, to understand my past. I never wanted to hurt you, Jackson. I never wanted any of this." "Then why didn't you leave?" he shouted, his voice raw and filled with pain. "Why didn't you just leave us alone?" "Because I care about you," Emily said, her voice trembling. "I love you, Jackson. I didn't want to run away from this. I didn't want to run away from you." Jackson shook his head, his face twisting with a pain so deep it took Emily's breath away. "Well, you did a hell of a job, Emily. You didn't just run away. You destroyed everything." Emily's heart shattered at his words, the finality in his tone, the look in his eyes. She wanted to reach out, to hold him, to tell him that they could get through this, but she knew it was no use. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry." Jackson didn't reply. He just turned and walked out the door, his footsteps echoing through the empty room like the hollow, aching thud of her own heart. Mary's sobs filled the silence, and Emily felt her own tears spill over again, her body trembling with the force of her grief. She had done what she came here to do. She had told the truth, and it had destroyed everything. And now, she was left with nothing but the pieces of a broken family, a broken heart, and a broken dream. She sank down onto the couch, burying her face in her hands, the weight of the truth crashing down on her like a wave, pulling her under, dragging her down into the darkness. The days that followed were a blur of silence and pain. Emily stayed away from the ranch, her heart heavy with the weight of everything that had happened. She had torn Jackson's life apart, shattered Mary's carefully guarded secrets, and all she could do now was watch as the pieces scattered around her, broken and irreparable. Back at the inn, she kept herself busy with work, trying to lose herself in the routine tasks that once felt mundane but now seemed like her only lifeline. But no matter how hard she scrubbed the floors or how meticulously she made the beds, she couldn't escape the ache in her chest, the gnawing guilt that twisted like a knife in her heart. She had thought telling the truth would bring some sort of closure, but instead, it had only left a deeper wound. And yet, amidst the despair, there was something else growing inside her. A resolve, a determination to make things right, somehow. She couldn't change what had happened, but she could be there for Mary. She could be there for Jackson, if he would let her. She wasn't going to run away from this, no matter how broken everything seemed. It was late one evening when her phone buzzed with a message from Mary. "Can you come to the ranch tomorrow? We need to talk." Emily's heart jumped at the words, a rush of fear and hope surging through her. She replied quickly, agreeing to meet, and then spent the rest of the night tossing and turning, her mind racing with what Mary could want to discuss. Did she want Emily to leave, to disappear from their lives forever? Or was there a chance, however slim, that Mary was ready to try and rebuild the fragile bond they had begun to form? The next morning, Emily made her way back to the ranch, her heart pounding with each step. The familiar path seemed somehow different now, shadowed with the memory of that terrible day when everything had come crashing down. She paused at the door, taking a deep breath, and then knocked softly. Mary opened the door almost immediately, her face drawn and pale but her eyes warm with a weary kind of resolve. "Thank you for coming, Emily," she said quietly. "Come inside." Emily followed her into the living room, her stomach churning with nerves. They sat down on the couch, the same couch where they had shared so many conversations, so many tentative steps towards friendship. But now, the air between them was thick with unspoken words, with the pain of everything that had happened. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," Mary began, her voice trembling slightly, "about everything. About what you told me, about Jackson, about Richard. And I realize that I can't keep hiding from this. The truth is out now, and I need to face it, no matter how hard it is." Emily nodded, her throat too tight to speak. "I know I should have told Jackson the truth years ago," Mary continued, tears welling in her eyes. "But I was so scared. Scared of losing him, scared of what he would think of me, of us. And now I've lost him anyway. No, Emily said, her voice firm despite the tears threatening to spill over. You haven't lost him, Mary. He's hurting right now, but he loves you. He always will. You're his mother, and nothing can change that. Mary looked at her, hope flickering in her eyes. Do you really think so? I know so, Emily said, her voice breaking. Jackson's angry and confused, but he's not gone. He just needs time. Mary nodded slowly, her expression softening. I want to believe that. I really do. But I don't know how to fix this, Emily. I don't know how to make things right. We'll figure it out, Emily said gently. Together. We just have to take it one step at a time. Mary took a deep, shuddering breath and then nodded again, a hint of a smile breaking through her tears. Okay, together. They sat in silence for a while, the tension easing as they took comfort in each other's presence. Emily felt a small spark of hope flicker to life in her chest. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way forward after all. But as the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the room, Mary's face grew serious again. There's something I need to ask you, Emily, she said quietly. Something I've been afraid to ask. Emily's heart skipped a beat, a sense of dread creeping over her. What is it? Mary hesitated, her hands twisting in her lap. Why did you come here? I mean, really come here? Was it just to find out the truth about your father? Or was there something more? The question hung in the air, heavy and charged, and Emily felt the blood drain from her face. She had been so focused on the fallout of the truth that she hadn't even thought about how her actions must have looked from the outside. To Mary, to Jackson, she must have seemed like a manipulator, someone who had wormed her way into their lives with a hidden agenda. It wasn't just about my father, she said finally, her voice barely more than a whisper. I wanted to understand where I came from, yes, but I also wanted to understand Jackson. I fell in love with him before I even knew who he really was. And when I found out, I didn't know what to do. I was scared, and I didn't want to lose him, but I knew I couldn't keep lying. I thought if I told the truth, we could figure it out together. I thought, she trailed off, shaking her head. I don't know what I thought. I just knew I couldn't keep pretending. Mary's eyes softened, a flicker of understanding passing over her face. You really love him, don't you? Emily nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. Yes, I love him more than I've ever loved anyone. And I know I've hurt him, and I don't know if he'll ever forgive me, but I can't just walk away. I can't. Mary reached out, taking Emily's hand in hers, and squeezed it gently. I believe you. I believe that you love him. And I think, deep down, he knows that too. Emily's heart swelled with a fragile hope, the warmth of Mary's hand grounding her, giving her strength. Do you think there's a chance? She asked softly, barely daring to hope. Mary's smile was small but sincere. There's always a chance, Emily, as long as you're willing to fight for it. Emily nodded, a sense of determination settling in her chest. I am. I'll fight for him, for you, for us. I won't give up. Mary's eyes filled with tears again, but this time, there was a glimmer of hope in them. Then we'll figure this out together. We'll find a way to heal. They spent the rest of the afternoon talking, their conversation weaving between painful truths and tentative plans for the future. By the time Emily left, the sky had darkened, and a cool breeze was blowing through the fields. But despite the chill in the air, she felt a warmth growing inside her, a sense of hope that she hadn't felt in days. As she made her way back to the inn, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, her heart leaping when she saw Jackson's name on the screen. Meet me at the barn. We need to talk. Emily's pulse quickened, a rush of nerves and anticipation surging through her. She hesitated for only a moment before turning on her heel and heading back toward the ranch, her heart pounding with each step. She didn't know what Jackson wanted to say, didn't know if he was ready to listen, but she knew she had to try. The barn loomed ahead, dark and silent, the door slightly ajar. She pushed it open, her heart in her throat, and stepped inside. Jackson was standing in the middle of the empty space, his back to her, his shoulders tense. The air was thick with unspoken words, with the ghosts of everything that had happened between them. Jackson, she said softly, her voice trembling. I got your message. He turned slowly, his face shadowed, his expression unreadable. For a long moment, he just looked at her, his eyes searching hers, and Emily felt like the world had shrunk to just the two of them, standing there in the dark, suspended between hope and heartbreak. I don't know what to say to you, he said finally, his voice low and rough. I don't know how to feel. Everything's so messed up, and I don't know how to make sense of it. Emily's heart ached at the pain in his voice, but she forced herself to stay calm, to stay strong. You don't have to make sense of it right now, she said gently. You just have to be honest. With yourself, with me, with your mom. Jackson let out a shaky breath, his hands clenching at his sides. I'm angry, Emily. I'm so damn angry. I feel like everything I thought I knew about my life was a lie. I don't know how to trust you, how to trust anyone. I understand, Emily whispered, tears filling her eyes. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just want you to know that I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and for a moment, she saw something flicker in his eyes. Something raw and vulnerable, something that made her heart leap. I don't know how to do this, he said, his voice breaking. I don't know how to fix this. We don't have to fix everything right now, Emily said, stepping closer, her heart pounding. We just have to try, one step at a time. He hesitated, his gaze locked on hers, and then, slowly, he nodded. Okay, he said softly, one step at a time. Emily let out a shaky breath, relief flooding through her. It wasn't a promise, it wasn't forgiveness, but it was something. It was a start. And for the first time in days, she felt a flicker of hope. Real, solid hope that maybe, just maybe, they could find their way back to each other. One step at a time. The days that followed were cautious and tentative, like walking on cracked ice, each step a delicate test of the fragile ground beneath them. Jackson and Emily's conversations were brief, their interactions laced with an undercurrent of emotions neither of them dared to fully acknowledge. But they were talking, and that was something. A small, trembling beacon of hope in the midst of all the confusion and pain. Mary, too, was beginning to heal, though it was a slow, arduous process. She and Jackson had long, tear-filled conversations, their voices carrying late into the night. Emily would hear them from her room at the inn, the murmurs of their voices mingling with the nighttime breeze. It was painful to be so close and yet so far from the family she was desperately trying to piece back together. But she knew this was something they had to work through on their own. One evening, about a week after that heart-wrenching night at the barn, Mary called Emily. Her voice was soft but steady, a calm resolve that made Emily's heart race with both fear and hope. Emily, she said, I've talked to Jackson, and we think it's time we all sat down together. No more secrets, no more hiding. Just the three of us. Can you come over tomorrow? Emily agreed, her heart pounding with anticipation and dread. The thought of facing Jackson and Mary together, of laying everything bare, terrified her. But it was also what they needed, what she needed. She spent that night wide awake, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing with everything she wanted to say, every apology and promise she needed to make. The next day, she arrived at the ranch just as the sun was beginning to set, the sky painted with shades of gold and crimson. She paused at the gate, taking a deep breath to steady herself before walking up to the house. Mary greeted her with a warm, if slightly strained, smile. Come in, Emily. Jackson's in the living room. Emily's heart thudded painfully as she stepped inside, the familiar scent of the house wrapping around her like a bittersweet memory. Jackson was sitting on the couch, his posture tense, his expression guarded as he looked up at her. Hi, Emily said softly, her voice trembling. Thank you for letting me come. Jackson nodded, his eyes flicking to his mother before settling back on Emily. We need to talk, he said simply, his voice steady but edged with a tension that made Emily's chest tighten. I know, she said, moving to sit down on the edge of the armchair across from them. Her hands were shaking, and she clasped them together tightly in her lap. I know I've hurt both of you, and I'm so sorry. I came here looking for answers, but I never meant to cause this much pain. You've got to understand, Emily, Jackson said, his voice raw with emotion. "It's not just about what you found out. It's about trust. You came into our lives under false pretenses. You let us believe you were someone you weren't." Emily nodded, tears blurring her vision. "I know. I was wrong, and I can't undo that. But I'm here now, being honest. I'm not hiding anymore. I just want to make things right, whatever it takes." Mary reached over, placing a hand on Jackson's arm. "Jackson, she's telling the truth. I've seen how much she cares about you, about us. She made a mistake, but she's trying to fix it." Jackson's gaze softened as he looked at his mother, his eyes filled with a mixture of love and pain. "I know, Mom. I know she cares. But it's still hard to accept that everything I thought I knew was a lie." "It wasn't a lie," Emily said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. "I didn't lie about my feelings for you. That was real, Jackson. It still is." Jackson's eyes met hers, and for a moment, she saw a flicker of the connection they had once shared, the warmth and tenderness that had drawn them together. But then it was gone, replaced by the walls he had built around himself. "I don't know if I can ever trust you again," he said, his voice breaking, "but I want to try. I want to find a way to move forward, for my mom, for us." Emily's breath caught, hope blooming painfully in her chest. "I'll do whatever it takes, Jackson. I'll wait as long as you need. Just don't shut me out completely." He nodded slowly, his eyes still guarded but a little less cold. "One step at a time," he murmured, echoing the words they had shared in the barn. Emily nodded, tears spilling over. One step at a time. They talked for hours, their words halting and uncertain, like two people learning to walk again after a long, painful fall. There were no grand gestures, no sweeping declarations of forgiveness or love, just a quiet, tentative agreement to try, to take it slow, to rebuild what had been broken, piece by fragile piece. In the weeks that followed, the tension in the Sullivan household began to ease, the heavy weight of the past slowly lifting as they navigated their new reality. Emily spent more time at the ranch, helping Mary around the house, working side by side with Jackson in the fields. It was hard, grueling work, but it was also healing. Each shared task a small step towards rebuilding the trust that had been shattered. One afternoon, as they were mending a fence on the far side of the property, Jackson paused, wiping the sweat from his brow. He glanced at Emily, his expression thoughtful. "Why did you stay?" he asked quietly, his voice carrying a note of genuine curiosity. "After everything, why didn't you just leave?" Emily looked at him, her heart aching with the weight of all the reasons she had for staying. "Because I love you," she said simply. "I love your mom. I love this place. And I believe in us, even when it felt like everything was falling apart." Jackson's gaze softened, a small, tentative smile tugging at his lips. "You're stubborn. You know that?" Emily laughed, the sound light and genuine. The first real laugh she had felt in what seemed like forever. "I've been told that a time or two." He chuckled, the tension between them easing, replaced by something warmer, something that felt a little like hope. "Maybe that's what we need. A little stubbornness." They finished the fence in companionable silence, the sun setting behind them in a blaze of color. Emily felt a sense of peace settle over her, a quiet contentment that had been missing for so long. They weren't fixed, not by a long shot, but they were getting there, one small step at a time. In the following days, they began to talk more openly, their conversations drifting from the mundane tasks of the ranch to the deeper, more painful subjects they had been avoiding. Jackson told her stories about his father, about the man he had believed him to be, about the anger and resentment that had simmered inside him for so long. Emily listened, her heart breaking for the boy he had been, the man he had become. And slowly, as they shared their fears and hopes and dreams, the walls between them began to crumble. There were still moments of tension, of doubt and uncertainty, but there was also laughter, shared smiles, the small, precious moments that built the foundation of something new and stronger than what had been before. It was during one of those moments, as they sat on the porch one evening, watching the stars blink to life in the darkening sky, that Jackson reached over and took her hand. His grip was firm and steady, his eyes shining with a quiet resolve that made Emily's heart skip a beat. "I don't know what the future holds," he said softly, his voice steady. "But I want you in it, Emily. I want to figure this out together." Tears welled in Emily's eyes as she squeezed his hand, her heart overflowing with love and hope. "I want that too, Jackson, more than anything." They sat there, hand in hand, the weight of the past still present but no longer crushing, the promise of a future stretching out before them, bright and uncertain and full of possibilities. In the months that followed, they worked together to transform the ranch, turning it into a place not just of work and tradition, but of healing and growth. Emily poured her heart into the project, using her connections and resources to create a charity foundation that supported local families, providing education, resources, and opportunities for the community she had come to love. The ranch became a beacon of hope, a symbol of resilience and renewal. And as they worked side by side, Emily and Jackson found themselves falling in love all over again, this time with a deeper understanding, a stronger foundation built on trust and honesty. It wasn't perfect. They still had their struggles, their moments of doubt and fear, but they faced them together, holding on to the belief that they could weather whatever storms came their way. And through it all, Mary stood by their side, her heart healing as she watched the family she had once feared was lost forever come together in a way she had never dared to hope for. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm, golden glow over the fields, Emily stood on the porch, watching Jackson play with a group of children from the community. Laughter filled the air, the sound bright and joyful, and Emily felt a surge of gratitude, of love so strong it left her breathless. Mary came up beside her, her eyes shining with pride and love as she watched her son. "You've done something incredible here, Emily. You've given this place a new life." Emily smiled, her heart full. "We all did. Together." Mary nodded, her gaze softening as she looked at Emily. "Thank you for not giving up on us." On him. Emily reached over, squeezing Mary's hand. "Thank you for letting me be a part of this, of your family." They stood there in comfortable silence, the sky darkening, the stars beginning to appear one by one. The world around them was quiet and still, filled with the promise of everything they had built, everything they had yet to become. And as Emily watched Jackson, his laughter echoing through the evening air, she knew with a certainty that she had finally found her place. Not just in his heart, but in this land, in this family, in this life they were creating together. It wasn't about where she had come from, or the secrets that had once haunted her. It was about the love they had fought for, the strength they had found in each other, the future they were building, one day at a time. Because in the end, it wasn't the past that defined them. It was the courage to face it, to forgive, to move forward, to love. And that was the true secret of the ranch, the hidden strength that bound them all together, that had brought them through the darkest of days and would carry them into the light of tomorrow. Together. Forever. If you enjoyed this heartwarming story about overcoming challenges and family love, don't forget to like the video, comment on what touched you the most, and subscribe to the channel. Stay tuned for our next exciting story.